Okay. I wanna just start by saying how incredible it has been to meet you all. And Deborah, I mean, I've been familiar with your work, and I like it a lot, and upon all other things you have been doing. And for Pam, I was fascinated with the experience Pam had in Asia for 21 years. And the experience is kind of really authentic because it enabled her to not only see the whole place, but see it in context. Some people who may go there for vacation or other short durations wouldn't see it. So it was fascinating for me. And since we started talking, I felt like this is a perspective that could be brought into the equation as we learn. Because what we really don't know is that we are missing opportunity to relate with one another, to connect with one another. And I think that's the foundation of most of the issues we are having today, because people don't get to know one another. So without having to say too much, I think I will leave it to for Pam to introduce our guest today. I don't know if I will call her guest, because she's you know, what I really admire so much. So without saying much anymore, I will hand it over to Pam. Pam, then you know, take it over from here. Thank you so much.
Oh, happy to. It's an honor to do this. I feel like a fangirl because I'm just geeked out by everything that Deborah Levine has done, and it's a privilege to introduce her. I'm sure you've read that that she's been at this for 33 years, but to me, it's not the quantity of her experience; it's the quality of the gift that she's giving the world. And like many of us, she's a coach and a consultant, but she goes way beyond that, leading this movement we're on, not just inside the corporate walls, but outside in our communities and nations and the world. Her experience comes from her confluence of her own lifetime of intersectionalities. She'll explain more about those. Her academic studies from anthropology to urban planning, which is way more than just the corporate world would take in. And I was intrigued by the way that she marries applied creativity with the pragmatic needs in the businesses and institutions that she serves. But the big thing for me is that somebody is taking, Deborah Levine, someone is taking our message way broader than certainly I do, and many of us, you know, in our consultancy. She's leading the way. I think someone said she's getting to the train station and figuring it all out so we can get there on time, and that was a perfect introduction. Many books. She's about to publish her 14th. Research, publications of all kinds, but one in particular is of great interest to me. It's the Unbiased Guide for Leaders. I'm dying for this book. I would give it to everybody that I know. It includes her matrix model management system, which is something that she came up with to help us all with our work. So I'm going to stop now because I want her to tell you her story, which, by the way, is another one of her pieces of experience. She is a person that engages leaders by story, but also helps people understand cultures by story. So being one Southern woman to another who helps people understand the South, I want to hear your story from you, Deborah. So obviously the first question is, how did you get into cross-cultural communication as a field?
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. The story itself certainly does go beyond the 33 years. I was brought up in the small island of British colony Bermuda. I was a British colonial. I learned English, not American English, British English as a kid, which was a discipline that was forced upon us whether we liked it or not, and we had to comply, believe me. So when we came to America and had American English, it was quite a bit of a shock, and I took quite a number of hits for this young lady out on the recess playground saying, I'm terribly sorry, but I am not obliged to follow what you say. Yeah, that went over really, really well. And so at the age of 7, I was already in a cross-cultural conundrum, which I had to get myself out of many, many times. And so when it was time to go to college, and I went to Harvard, I preferred really to be a philosophy major. And I was told by the upperclassmen that was a bad choice for me because they went on to diss Harvard in a number of ways. And so I didn't know what to do. And it just so happened that there was a new program, new major offered, called Folklore and Mythology. And I thought, that's me, yes. Because when you live on an island, sea nymphs and dragons out of the sea are part of your life. So let's go there. And that's how I became one of the pioneers in the cross-cultural way of looking at mythology, stories, folklore, and the cultural anthropology of oral tradition. Having that at such a young age jettisoned me into the use of stories in how to convey culture, define it, use it. And 33 years ago, I started working in this area, and not necessarily by choice. People found me. And they said, well, we would like for you to be in charge of Chicago's interfaith dialogues. I said, well, that's very nice. Why me? Because of your background, you are probably the best person to be able to translate one religion to another. And besides, no one else in the office wants to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Okay, well, we're off and running, and that was in religious diversity, my first experience professionally of working in the field. And I loved it. I didn't think I would, but it was just me. And so when I left American Jewish Committee, I founded my own company, nonprofit, interfaith network in the DuPage County, which was the technical corridor, developing internationally out in the western suburbs of Chicago. And off we went. And I learned early in my dancing career, I know it sounds odd, but I was the artistic director and founder of Terpsichore Baroque Dance Company, to always document what I did. And so I continue to document and write books, lots and lots of books.
Absolutely. Well, I think it was apropos that you studied mythology, because you've taken this to mythological proportions in your work. So that was an easy segue. Thank you for that. But I'm interested because of all the various things you've mentioned, dancing and Harvard education and all these things. Your education is so varied, and the training you've gotten from, you said urban planning in the bio that I read earlier, and I just want to really touch on the idea of how is that confluence of academic training being used in what you're writing and doing around cultural diversity. What does that give you in terms of giving your gift?
Right. So the cultural anthropology at Harvard and the mythology and folklore that I studied there shaped how I communicate and what is important to me in culture. When I went to get my master's in urban planning, it was 1970, I believe, maybe 71 or 2. And I did not see what I felt was appropriate for my background and what would be most relevant for society going forward. And that was an emphasis on urban planning, culture, arts, and communication. And so I created it. And I pushed my curriculum through the University of Illinois at Chicago and got approval. And I designed that major, that master's program myself, so that I could do that. And then as I went on further, I got a certificate in arts administration, which allowed me to run major arts organizations, but also to implement the community building aspect of it. And then went further. I love education, and got a master's degree in religion, because I felt that the belief system, how we think, how we shape our ideas and our ideals, was part and parcel of what I had started all those years ago in terms of culture and communication. And so it actually it threads together a lot more smoothly than I had realized, and gives me the opportunity to do the same for others, to take them on the journey with me.
Well, you realize you're almost mapping out the hero's journey, because in the beginning of your explanation you spoke of, I didn't see it, so I created it myself, and that is not everyone. Not everyone believes, as they probably should believe, but not everyone believes I can change the world. You're taking us across the threshold into a new world. And that leads me to the question, as I mentioned in the introduction, you are taking our messages to a much wider audience than everyone in our field does. So you are the editor-in-chief of the American Diversity Report. And I want to know, what do you do as the editor-in-chief? What does that mean? How are you accomplishing the idea of the movement we're on through that role that you play?
All right, so I created the AmericanDiversityReport.com about 13 years ago. I had been writing already books, this, that, and the other, and I wanted to be online. I had studied computer programming back in the mid-'60s. My mommy told me I had to. And so I wanted to be online with the rest of the young guys. Okay, let's go for it, right? So I created this in part to be online, but in part because no one was going to allow me to be editor-in-chief of anything. I hadn't been one before. And so again, I created it and titled myself editor-in-chief. And I had no idea what that would mean, but I was about to learn. And so what I wanted to do was not only to publish my own work, but to give other people a voice. It's always been part of what I do, is to give others an opportunity to be heard. I don't want to speak for everybody. I want to let them and give them that voice, tell people what their culture is like and what the values are, what the needs are. And so I put out a submission form, and lo and behold, I started to get articles from all over the world. And sometimes the English was not their native language, and so I was going to have to be the editor and help them, which I have done now for 13 years. And it's just grown. It now has its own podcast. It's my baby. And it's one of those things where it's a joy to see newcomers come in and participate. It's wonderful for the regulars to send me new articles. And we have an e-newsletter that comes out every month.
That's amazing. On behalf of everyone that coaches and consults in the organizations, thank you for getting our message across, but also thank you for taking communities that don't speak English as their first language and helping us get stories we might never find. That's an amazing contribution to our field, and I certainly, and I'm sure everyone else appreciates that. The interesting piece that you began with was, well, I wrote books and I found my way to this editor-in-chief role, which, again, hero's journey. But the idea of the books, this is really, really important stuff, because when I read about all the books, and you're about to publish your 14th, this is a way in which you can not just give a message, but actually an implementation. You know, you can guide people through the idea of doing it for themselves or with others, and it's much more than, you know, standing in front of a group in a workshop. So I want to, which you also do, so I want to have you talk about your books and how you use them in training, because two things struck me, two buzzwords immediately struck me when I was reading your list of publications. One is bias. We're all talking about bias right now. So the Unbiased Guide for Leaders is incredibly important. But the matrix model that you do, the system that you have for matrix management, that's an important implementation that I think others can take on and expand their own business through. You know, giving the idea in collaboration with you of how to do this, not just what it is, how to do this. So I'm going to leave it with you to just walk us through some of the books, what we can learn, and how they influence your own trainings and workshops.
All right. So the matrix model management was created when I also created the Women's Council on Diversity for Chattanooga, in a response to our increasing internationalization and globalization. And I knew that we were not really prepared for the global economy and didn't have the mindset yet that would allow us to bring in all the new information that was coming, arrange it so that it was useful to us, and then be on teams that were very, very diverse. So in creating the council, I also created the methodology for communication, which was the matrix model management system. And I combined all that I had used and worked with in the past in the system, and go through the process of how you create a global mindset and bring people along with me, from communication to emotional intelligence to wise decision making and the planning that then comes out of all three. And doing so, one of the things that was easy to do in many ways was to morph it into a workbook for unconscious bias and conscious decisions, because that was embedded in the original matrix model management system. Cross-cultural communication almost automatically has bias issues come up in it, and we have to learn how to deal with it. And every single detail that we put out there in our communication changes the story in ways that we may not be aware. And it's that awareness that we have to build in order to progress from awareness to sensitivity to competence. And that's where I want to take people. And that's why I always really take these books as practical guides, not just textbooks and theories. They are useful for teams, for leaders. They can be used in large groups and small groups. They have a certain flexibility, but they are all supposed to be for people to just use, not muse on.
That's just fabulous. I want to, in a minute, we're going to take some questions from anyone who's on the line. But while you're thinking of your questions, I'd like to move to the books and the things that we can learn from your messages and incorporate into what we're trying to do ourselves. You also touched on a group or two. You've done a lot with regard to storytelling for leaders, helping people engage in cultures by understanding the other culture, groups of people, women, etc. Walk us through some of those groups and what they do and how they contribute to your movement, and everyone can be thinking of their questions when we turn it over in a moment.
All right. So one of the first groups I created was the DuPage Interfaith Resource Network in Chicago. It was created in response to religious conflicts in the community, whether it was schools or in the corporations. And what it did was create the process for religious literacy. And being who I am, I had to make it quick and easy, especially as the first group that wanted that quick, easy access to information with law enforcement. I hadn't anticipated that. And so I created quick reference religious diversity cards people can use. And I continued that model all the time. Make it quick, easy, and fun, maybe. Yeah, let's have a little fun. This shouldn't be so hard. And we should smile and enjoy. So doing that, when I did the matrix model management, it also has a workbook, and you go through it, and it's fun. Let's have a good time. The same thing with the unbiased guide. It has a workbook. You write in it, you do it, you enjoy it, you share, you learn more than you think you do. That's how I work.
I love that. I love that. Now, I have some personal questions, but I'm going to hold those because I think that the audience should be allowed to take advantage of this moment that we have with Deborah. So I'll open it up to anyone that has a question now. If you want, I suppose the best idea is to just speak up because you might not have the ability to chat. You had a question, Joseph? I'm sorry.
Yes, I do have a question. And the question is, Barbara, I'm just wondering, with reference to your training on writing, how far have you been doing it, or how long? And are there ways you can bring that into this equation, maybe down the road?
All right, writing. I started writing as a teenager, actually younger, but I published my first story as having written an essay for school, and the teacher said, that's pretty good. Why don't you publish it? Oh, okay. I didn't think anything of it because I thought, writers are poor. I didn't want to be poor. No. So maybe when I was finished with my real career, I'd write. I figured that would be about age 40. But I found that writing was part of my job. Grants, newsletters, essays, reports. Everything required written communication. And pretty soon I realized, hey, I'm good at this. Maybe I should maximize my talents on this one. And so the first thing that I did is, as a dance historian, I applied for a fellowship and wrote a proposal. Got it. And they wanted me to write for a journal, an academic journal on dance history. It took me 2 years to get that out of my head, and they accepted it, and I gave it as a presentation to a workshop. And I said to myself, this is really hard work. I'm never going to do this again. So they kept finding me. The archdiocese from the Roman Catholic Church in Chicago asked me to write a chapter for a book. Then the American Jewish Committee asked me to write a book for headquarters in New York City on Israel, Judaism, Christianity. I kept getting myself in deeper and deeper. And writing, the more you do it, the better you become, of course, like any art form. And I just kept on going. To tell you the truth, the only formal training I have ever had in writing was one course at Harvard, which was required. And that's it. So I've taught myself, I've had people teach me. I've learned to send my work out to readers who are the meanest critics I can find and let them take it apart. And I urge people who have any interest in writing to do the same. And just don't cry, just say thank you and learn. And that's how I've done it. And my writing has gotten better and better and better. One of my recent books, a memoir, I've written 2 memoirs because it will force me to tell me, how have you done this? Okay, so I was so delighted at the second memoir that I sent to my sister-in-law, and she says, you've actually gotten pretty good. Yes. All right. So now I'm officially a good writer.
Wow. I think you have an absolutely incredible amount of humility, because listen, I told you before when we spoke on the phone and are getting to know each other, I would follow you around for a minute and learn a lifetime of things. And so that's beautiful, especially that your sister said you were good. I'm looking to call my sister about my articles now. If I take off my hat as moderator and speak as a person who's in awe of what you do, one of the things that has struck me in all of my world travels, living overseas for most of my adult life, having lived in America, we sort of did the opposite, you and I found that there were some contexts that don't make sense from a diversity perspective. And one of them is, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, diversity-wise and inclusion-wise, I should be me over there, right? And I think we mistake some cultural contexts when we give advice to each other on how to be ourselves in another culture in the right way. I don't know if you have any advice for people who are stuck in that same situation.
The difficulty in finding yourself in a new culture, right, is immense. And I remember coaching one family, because many of the executives I work with bring their families overseas. Right? And the wife says to me, how can I fit in so that they won't know I'm American? And I said to her, don't bother, okay? They're going to know it from second one. And she looked terrified, and the husband started to giggle. And she said, well, why? And I said, because there are things about you that you're not even conscious of. For example, the way you use your hands, you move, right? You end up, and she was going to Germany, you end up in Germany, that's not the body language culture that's theirs. And I can remember being in Rome at age 17 with my Aunt Polly, who's 92 now, standing on the steps somewhere and thinking, we're dressed like Romans, Italians, we should fit in. And some guy comes by and says, hi, ladies, welcome from America. Thanks. So one of the things that people have to recognize, right, is that you may not immediately or ever quite fit in, but you can show respect. You can pay attention. You can be aware of the words they use and choose what you're going to do. Now, you and I, right, have been in the South. We know that somebody from New York who comes down here and tries to imitate a Southern accent is not going to be rewarded, right? So there's some things that you just have to let be.
They might get a bless your heart from us, but one of the interesting things I think you tell and you say in that advice is there's a difference between courtesy and becoming trying to become native. I appreciate the idea that you've given that they're going to know your nationality anyway, but there are some things you need to take on out of courtesy, and so that mix of being other is a really special place. The opposite of that, having lived overseas, is you see these children being born in a country that their parents are not, citizens of. And, I lived in China for many years, almost a decade, really, and there were children being born while the parents were in China, and one of the children was American by birth. And she said, well, I'm American. She'd never been there except to be born. And she spoke Mandarin. She spoke Swedish. Her mother's Swedish. She spoke, her father's Irish. Just a variety of languages and attitudes and cultures that she was a part of but not a part of. Growing up, these children, and there's lots of adoptions and things, they're going to be their own special kind of culture, if you will. And I have a feeling that, the way travel has been these days and people being expatriates, we're going to see influences from that. Have you seen that? Have you seen people who are global citizens becoming a big part of your work?
These young people remind me of myself, having been from a different culture, going back and forth. There's actually someone gave me a name for them called polyglots. Polyglots.
Oh, I love that.
And they have the ability to move in and out of cultures the way that most of us don't. And they have skills that mean they can adapt more quickly. They can understand in better depth than most of us. They are truly treasures. They may not always be conscious of what they can do. So many times what I like to do with people like that is to work with them to make them conscious of what they are, what they can do. And often writing is key in the ability to do that, to mesh it all. Because often what they do is they compartmentalize, and they are here, then, okay, now we're over here. But to pull it all together is the key. And that's where I want people to go.
Absolutely. We're having trouble with the microphone, so we'll be making sure that this video is shown. It'll be shown to many, many people, and so we're going to make sure that there's a comment section below the video when it's shown. So for the people that couldn't get on the video, for the people that didn't have a microphone to speak, please put that in the comment section, your questions, and we'll watch those, because this video will have an audience of thousands when we're done, and I'd love to hear from as many of them, letting Deborah know how her work has influenced all of us.
People do ask me a lot, and that is, what are your workshops like? You have so many complex ideas. What happens? So I'd like to describe to you the room. Often it's a large room with small tables, and each table has 4 to 6 people. And around that table, I go and I say, okay, I'm going to ask one of you to volunteer to be the scribe, right? And sometimes they volunteer, and if they don't, then I am happy to volunteer someone for them, which I do. And I warn them that way that I do that. But that person will collect a lot of the answers, and they start with the communication section of the matrix model management system. And they start with very simple stories about themselves. And then they compare notes. And then they create out of that a team story. And the way they do that is key, the process, the negotiation, the management. And if they come to a crossroads where they cannot decide, that too is part of the experience, and they have to document what happened. And part of the documentation is the emotional response. So the emotional intelligence piece in all of this is very key. And that's why I create emotion metrics where you measure it. So you don't have to always explain in great detail your emotions, because that sometimes makes things more difficult. You just say, okay, I'm at a 2. And there's this measurement from 1 to 4, and people know where you are. And if you're at a 4, you know you're in trouble. So it gives you some tools to deal with difficulties. Diversity is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't come without some problems, and we have to be able to meet those challenges.
Absolutely. It's a symbiotic relationship, this diversity and inclusion. And you've really hit on some great tools for us. I wanted to make sure we got to is what's next for you. And anything you want to tell us about, where you, where you see even the field going. So take a minute to do that, and we'll wrap up, because I'm fascinated by what you think is next.
Well, what has happened is as frequently is people find me and ask me to do certain things. And what are they asking me to do? They're asking me to help them write as entrepreneurs their story, brand themselves with their memoirs, brand their businesses, their projects with everything from a memoir to a press release to content marketing of various sorts. And I've been asked to teach that at journalism and business schools, and ended up being the education director of an international Rotary E-Club. And I expect to be doing that for African entrepreneurs in the near future. Just keep going.
I mean, yeah, please keep going, please, because what you're doing is an amazing gift to all of us. The ways in which the themes, the things I took away from what you're saying are, stories are the communication by which we learn and become so much. And, body language, dance, stories, all those things that we don't think about when we think about business or politics or, friendships, etc. But stories are enormous, and that's just an age-old cultural, it's how we hand down our history in many ways. And so I think you've hit on something pretty major in terms of a tool. And then you've taken that tool and you've put it into models and into techniques that we can take to do specific things. So I would close this by saying personally thank you. And I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone when I say thank you for your contribution, and please keep going. We need you more than ever right now with the emotionality that's involved in our diversity. So we owe you our thanks and our excitement for you being here. Thank you. And thank you, Joseph, for having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So appreciate the opportunity to share my journey and hopefully bring others along with me. This has been a fascinating, crazy life, and the best is yet to come. That's all I could say. The best is yet to come.
Well, I think you've just hit on what we're going to edit as the last line is just what you just said. So joining you is what I think everybody's going to want to do. So I'll let Joseph finish this up with us. And thank you, Deborah. You're an amazing woman.
Thank you. I'm so honored to do this. Joseph, thank you.
I don't even have words to express my feeling that having the people I really regard highly among all the people within this group, together. And I would like us to continue to use that forum as a resource center to support whatever one is doing, as well as provide information to those who otherwise never get it.
This video is for everyone that's watching, regardless of whether you're watching it live or in recorded fashion. Please put your communications in the comment boxes, because this group that Joseph has made for all of us to collaborate within, that will become some of the conversations we have later, some of our own story. So we look forward to seeing the comments in the box below when this video is shown.
Wonderful, wonderful.